The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, 1876. But it wasn't the bullet that changed Josephine O'Malley's life. It was the wounded cowboy who collapsed at her feet moments later. Blood soaked through his faded denim as the tall stranger grimaced, his weathered face contorted with pain, while he clutched his thigh where the bullet had torn through flesh and muscle. "I reckon I need some help, madam," he managed through gritted teeth, his voice deep as thunder rolling across the prairie. Josephine gathered her skirts and knelt beside him, her practical nature taking over, despite the danger that might still lurk. "Who shot you, mister?" "Name's Ross Lawson," he said, ignoring her question as he tried unsuccessfully to stand. "And I seem to have made an enemy of the wrong cattle baron." He winced, stumbling back down. "I can't stand," he admitted, frustration evident in his voice. Josephine's blue eyes met his, and something unexpected passed between them, a spark, a recognition of kindred spirits perhaps. "Then don't," she said softly, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze. "I'll sit with you until we figure this out." The wounded cowboy's eyes widened slightly, not accustomed to such immediate kindness from a stranger. Josephine was no ordinary frontier woman. The daughter of a doctor who had taught her his trade before consumption took him 3 winters ago. She knew a gunshot wound when she saw one. "My cabin's just over that rise," she said, nodding toward a small hill. "We need to get you there before whoever did this decides to finish the job." Ross Lawson's eyes darted to the horizon, then back to her face. "Madam, helping me could bring you trouble. Trouble and I are old acquaintances, Mr. Lawson." She tore a strip from her petticoat and quickly fashioned a tourniquet above his wound. "Now, can you make it if you lean on me?" The cabin stood solitary against the vast Wyoming sky, a humble testament to Josephine's determination to forge her own path after her father's death. Inside, she directed Ross to her small bed in the corner while she gathered supplies, whiskey for disinfection, clean rags, her father's medical instruments. "This will hurt," she warned, pouring amber liquid over the wound. Ross's jaw tightened, but he made no sound as the alcohol burned through torn flesh. Instead, he studied her, the determined set of her chin, the confident movements of her hands as she extracted the bullet, the way her auburn hair escaped its pins as she worked. "You've done this before," he observed, his voice strained but steady. "My father was a doctor," she replied, threading a needle. "I was his apprentice until he passed. Now I help the folks around these parts when needed." She glanced up at him. "Though most of my patients aren't quite so mysterious. Not much to tell. I'm just a cowhand caught in someone else's war." Josephine raised an eyebrow as she began stitching his wound. "Most cowhands I know don't carry a Colt like that, with silver inlay and custom grips." Ross's hand instinctively moved toward his holster, which Josephine had placed on a nearby chair. "Observant, aren't you? Need to be out here." She tied off the final stitch. "You're not just passing through, are you, Mr. Lawson?" "Ross," he corrected. "And no, madam, I've come to settle some business with Edward Thornton." The name hung heavy in the small cabin. Thornton owned half the county, and what he didn't own, he wanted. 3 settlers had already been driven off their land in the past month alone. "Thornton's men did this to you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Ross nodded grimly. "I used to ride for him, years back. Know things he doesn't want known. And now you're back to what expose him? Take revenge? That's a quick way to die in these parts." "Justice," Ross said simply. "My brother owned a small spread north of here. Thornton wanted it for water rights. When Jacob refused to sell..." His voice trailed off, the pain of memory evident in his eyes. Josephine sat back on her heels. "They killed him? Made it look like an accident, barn fire. But I know better." Ross's eyes met hers, their intensity almost physical. "I've spent 2 years gathering evidence witnesses. I'm taking it all to the federal marshal in Cheyenne next week." "If you live that long," Josephine observed, bandaging his thigh with practiced efficiency. Night fell quickly, bringing with it the bone-deep chill of the high plains. Josephine stoked the fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Ross watched her move about the cabin, noting the small touches that made this place a home: dried wildflowers in a jar, a well-worn book of poetry on the table, a patchwork quilt that added color to the rustic interior. "You live here alone?" he asked as she handed him a steaming plate. since father died. She settled into a chair across from him. Most folks thought I'd sell up and move to town, maybe find a husband, but this land was my father's dream. Her eyes drifted to the window, where moonlight silvered the landscape. And it became mine. It's not safe for a woman alone. A wry smile curved her lips. Is that concern from a man currently bleeding on my bed sheets? Despite the pain, Ross chuckled. Fair point. They ate in companionable silence, the crackling fire and distant coyote calls the only sounds. When they finished, Josephine insisted Ross take the bed while she would sleep in her father's old rocking chair. I can't take your bed, he protested. You can and will. Doctor's orders. Her tone brooked no argument. Besides, I've fallen asleep in that chair more times than I can count. As she settled in for the night, wrapping herself in a blanket, Ross studied her from across the room. Why are you helping me, Miss O'Malley? You don't know me. Josephine considered his question. My father never turned away someone in need. Said it was the measure of a person how they treat strangers. She paused. And I know what it's like to want justice when the law seems to look the other way. Your father's death? No, she said softly. My sister's. Her eyes, when they met his, held old pain. 3 years ago, Julia took a position as governess at Thornton's ranch. She didn't come home alive. They said she fell from a horse, but Julia was born riding. Understanding dawned in Ross's eyes. We share an enemy, it seems. It appears we do. Josephine's voice was quiet but firm. Get some rest, Mr. Lawson. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles. Dawn brought the sound of hoofbeats. Josephine was instantly alert. Moving to the window with the practiced stealth of someone accustomed to danger, 3 riders approached, the rising sun glinting off their rifle barrels. Thornton's men, she whispered, grabbing her father's old shotgun from above the fireplace. Ross was already pulling himself upright, reaching for his Colt despite the pain that clouded his features. They must have tracked me here. You should let me go out there, draw them away. On that leg? You'd be dead before you cleared the yard. She checked the shotgun's load, her movements quick and sure. Besides, they've already seen my home. I'm involved now, whether I like it or not. Ross's eyes narrowed as he took in her stance. This wasn't her first confrontation. You've dealt with Thornton before. Let's just say we've had our disagreements about property lines. She positioned herself by the window. Stay out of sight. The riders stopped 30 yards from the cabin. The leader, a burly man with a face like cured leather, called out, Miss O'Malley, we're looking for a man who might have passed this way. Dangerous fellow, thought you might want to know. Haven't seen anyone, Mr. Harker, she called back, her voice steady. Just me and my shotgun here. Harker's laugh was dry as prairie dust. Now, Miss O'Malley, we tracked him right to your doorstep. Blood trail's pretty clear. His tone hardened. Mr. Thornton would consider it a personal favor if you'd send him out. Mr. Thornton's favors come at too high a price, she replied. Ride on. The men exchanged glances, and one began to circle toward the back of the cabin. Ross, despite his injury, positioned himself by the rear window, Colt at the ready. Don't make this difficult, Harker called. We just want the man. You can keep your little patch of dirt. This patch of dirt is my home. Josephine's voice carried the conviction of someone who had fought for everything she had. And I don't make a habit of turning over injured men to those who shot them. Harker's patience visibly snapped. Have it your way. He signaled to his men, who raised their rifles. The first shot shattered the window beside Josephine, sending glass fragments flying. She returned fire, the shotgun's roar deafening in the small cabin. One rider yelled and clutched his arm, but kept his seat. Ross fired through the back window, forcing the circling rider to retreat. Pain lanced through his leg with every movement, but adrenaline kept him focused. They'll rush us next, he warned, reloading quickly. Josephine nodded grimly, reaching for more shells. There's a root cellar, trapdoor under that rug. If they set fire to the cabin, I'm not leaving you to face them alone, Ross interrupted. Their eyes met across the room, something unspoken passing between them. In that moment, they were no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance, but allies bound by a common enemy and a growing connection neither had anticipated. The standoff continued for tense minutes, shots exchanged sporadically. Then, unexpectedly, new riders appeared on the horizon, 6 men approaching fast from the direction of town. "The ranch hands from the Triple B," Josephine breathed, relief evident in her voice. "Their boss, Bill Buchanan, has no love for Thornton." Sure enough, seeing themselves suddenly outnumbered, Harker and his men retreated, firing a few parting shots before galloping away across the open plain. The newcomers reined in before the cabin. A gray-haired man with a weathered face dismounted. "You all right in there, Josie?" he called. "We're fine, Bill," she answered, opening the door cautiously, shotgun still in hand. "Your timing couldn't be better." Bill Buchanan surveyed the damage to the cabin, then noticed Ross leaning heavily against the wall. "Found yourself trouble, I see." "Trouble found me," she corrected. "This is Ross Lawson. He has evidence against Thornton, proof of what we've all suspected." Bill's eyebrows rose. "That so?" He studied Ross with newfound interest. "Then we'd better make sure you live long enough to use it." By midday, the Triple B ranch hands had helped repair Josephine's broken window and reinforced her doors. Bill Buchanan, after hearing Ross's story, offered the protection of his ranch until Ross was well enough to travel to Cheyenne. "Thornton's been a cancer in this territory too long," the older rancher said grimly. "If you've got something that'll bring him down, I'll stake my ranch on helping you." Despite the logical arguments for moving to the safety of the larger ranch, Ross found himself reluctant to leave Josephine's cabin. "I've already brought danger to your doorstep," he told her as the others prepared to depart. "But I don't like the idea of leaving you here alone." "I won't be alone," she replied. "Bill's leaving 2 of his men to keep watch." She hesitated, then added more softly, "But I appreciate your concern." Something in her voice made Ross study her more closely. "You don't want me to go either, do you?" Josephine met his gaze steadily. "I've spent 3 years wondering if I'd ever find a way to make Thornton pay for what happened to Julia. Now you're here, with the means to do it. I want—" She paused, searching for words. "I want to see this through." Understanding dawned in Ross's eyes. "You're coming to Cheyenne with me." It wasn't a question, and Josephine didn't treat it as one. "Yes, my testimony about Julia might help your case." Bill Buchanan cleared his throat, having overheard their conversation. "Then it's settled. You'll both come to the Triple B until Lawson can ride. My wife will be glad of the female company." He glanced meaningfully at Josephine. "And it seems you two have formed a partnership of sorts." As they prepared to leave, Ross found himself watching Josephine as she gathered a few belongings, struck by the efficiency of her movements and the quiet strength she exuded. In just one day, this woman had saved his life, fought by his side, and now committed to his dangerous cause. Something shifted in his chest, respect, admiration, and perhaps something more that he wasn't ready to name. The Triple B Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, its well-maintained buildings and healthy cattle a testament to Bill Buchanan's skillful management. Margaret Buchanan, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, welcomed them warmly, fussing over Ross's injury and showing Josephine to a comfortable room in the main house. That evening, after a hearty meal, Ross found himself on the porch, staring at the stars while his leg throbbed dully beneath fresh bandages. The sound of the door opening pulled him from his thoughts as Josephine stepped outside, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Should you be up?" she asked, moving to stand beside his chair. "Probably not," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But I've never been good at staying put." "Something we have in common." She settled into the chair beside his, her profile illuminated by the soft lamplight spilling from the window. "How's the leg?" "Better, thanks to your doctoring." He studied her for a moment. "You never really told me about your sister, or why you stayed on that homestead alone after your father passed." Josephine was quiet for so long that Ross thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "Julia was younger than me by 2 years, beautiful, full of life. After father fell ill, we needed money. The position at Thornton's paid well." Her hands twisted in her lap. 2 months later, they brought her body back, told me it was an accident. But you didn't believe them. Julia wrote to me every week. In her last letter, she mentioned being uncomfortable with the way Thornton watched her. Josephine's voice hardened. 3 days later, she was dead. The local sheriff who owes his position to Thornton wouldn't even ask questions. Ross's jaw tightened. And you stayed on your land because it was all I had left of my family. Because leaving would mean Thornton won. Her eyes, when they met his, burned with quiet determination. And because I promised myself that someday I'd find a way to make him answer for Julia. Without thinking, Ross reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. We will make him answer. I promise you that. The unexpected touch sent warmth spreading through Josephine's arm. For a moment, neither moved, the connection between them tangible in the still night air. Then, slowly, her fingers curled around his. Tell me about your brother, she said softly. Ross's thumb brushed absently across her knuckles as memories surfaced. Jacob was the steady one. While I was riding with outfits across 3 territories, he was building something lasting. Had a wife, Emma, and a little boy. Pain flashed across his features. They were visiting her family when the fire happened. Thank God for that. At least. Where are they now? Emma remarried last year. Good man, from what I hear. They moved to California. His voice grew quiet. I visit when I can, make sure my nephew knows about his father. And you've spent 2 years gathering evidence against Thornton. It wasn't a question. Ross nodded. Tracked down former employees, people he's wronged. Found a ledger showing bribes to officials. His eyes met hers in the darkness. It has to be enough. It has to be. The desperation in his voice resonated with Josephine's own need for justice. On impulse, she squeezed his hand. It will be. We'll make it be enough. Days passed at the Triple B, each one bringing Ross closer to recovery and, unexpectedly, closer to Josephine. They spent hours together playing chess in the evenings, sharing stories of their lives before Thornton's shadow fell across them, planning their journey to Cheyenne. Ross found himself watching for her smile, memorizing the sound of her laughter, rare but genuine when it came. Margaret Buchanan noticed, of course. That girl's been alone too long, she remarked to Ross one afternoon as they watched Josephine helping with the ranch's kitchen garden. Focused so hard on surviving, she forgot to live. She's the strongest woman I've ever met, Ross replied, not taking his eyes from Josephine's figure among the vegetables. Margaret's knowing smile went unseen. Strong, yes, but everyone needs someone to lean on sometimes. A week into their stay, Bill Buchanan rode in with news that sent a chill through the household. Thornton's hired guns from outside the territory, he reported grimly. Word is, they're offering $500 for information on Ross's whereabouts, and $1,000 for the man himself, dead or alive. We need to move up our timeline, Ross said decisively. My leg's well enough to ride. We should head for Cheyenne tomorrow. Not just yet, Bill cautioned. Marshal Jenkins is out of town until next week. His deputies in Thornton's pocket, you'd be handing yourself over for nothing. Then what do you suggest? Josephine asked, concern evident in her voice. Bill considered for a moment. I've got a line cabin up in the high country, remote, defensible. You two hole up there until Jenkins returns, then make your move. By dawn the next day, Ross and Josephine were mounted and ready, their saddlebags packed with supplies. 2 of Bill's most trusted hands would accompany them to the cabin, then return to the ranch to avoid drawing attention. Be careful, Margaret urged, pressing a packet of food into Josephine's hands. And remember what I told you. Josephine's cheeks colored slightly as she recalled the older woman's advice from the night before. Life's too short to deny your heart, especially in times of danger. The journey to the line cabin took most of the day, climbing steadily into the foothills where pines replaced the prairie grasses. The small structure came into view. As the sun began its westward descent, a sturdy log cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, with clear views of the approach from all sides. Once they had settled in and Bill's men departed, an unexpected awkwardness fell between Ross and Josephine. The cabin consisted of one room with a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, and a single bed. Their forced proximity, without the buffer of the Buchanans' presence, suddenly made both acutely aware of their growing feelings for each other. I'll sleep by the fire, Ross offered as Josephine surveyed the space. Don't be ridiculous. Your leg needs proper rest. She busied herself arranging their supplies, avoiding his gaze. "We can share the bed. We're both adults." Ross raised an eyebrow. "Your reputation is already in tatters if anyone knows I'm alone up here with you," she finished with a practical tone that didn't quite mask her nervousness. "Besides, who's to know?" As night fell, they prepared a simple meal together, moving around each other in the small space with increasing comfort, sitting across the rough-hewn table, eating by lamplight. Ross found himself studying the way the golden glow softened Josephine's features, highlighting the auburn highlights in her hair. "You're staring," she observed, though her tone held no reproach. "Just thinking how different this all might have been," he admitted. "If I hadn't been shot, if you hadn't found me, if Thornton hadn't brought us both pain." She set down her fork. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been if he hadn't crossed it?" Ross considered the question. "I'd probably still be drifting from ranch to ranch, taking jobs as they came, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." His eyes met hers across the table. "What about you?" "I'd still be on my father's homestead," she said softly. "Still alone, still wondering if I'd ever find a way to get justice for Julia." She paused. "Still waiting for something I couldn't name. And now?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "Now," she said carefully, "I'm here, with you, fighting for something that matters." Later, as they settled into the bed, each keeping carefully to their own side, a respectable distance between them, Ross found himself more awake than ever, acutely aware of Josephine's presence beside him, the scent of her hair, the rhythm of her breathing. "Josie," he said quietly, using the diminutive for the first time, "are you afraid?" In the darkness, he felt, rather than saw her turn toward him. "Of Thornton? Yes. Of what happens if we fail? Definitely." A pause then, more softly. "Of what I'm beginning to feel for you. Perhaps most of all." The honest admission hung in the darkness between them. Ross's hand found hers beneath the blanket, fingers intertwining. "I've spent 2 years focused solely on bringing Thornton down. I didn't allow myself to think beyond that." He hesitated. "Now I find myself wondering what comes after." "After," she repeated, the word like a promise. "I like the sound of that." They fell asleep that way, hands clasped between them, a connection forged in shared purpose beginning to transform into something deeper. Morning brought crisp mountain air and a sense of renewed purpose. They spent the day securing the cabin's defenses, checking sight lines, preparing ammunition, ensuring multiple escape routes if the worst should happen. By unspoken agreement, they kept conversation light, focusing on the practical rather than the emotional undercurrents that had surfaced the night before. As evening approached, Ross stepped outside to check on the horses and scan the surroundings. The setting sun painted the landscape in fiery hues, the beauty at odds with the danger they faced. He was so absorbed in his vigilance that he didn't hear Josephine approach until she spoke. "It's peaceful up here," she observed, coming to stand beside him. "Makes it hard to believe there's someone out there who wants you dead." Ross turned to her, struck anew by her quiet strength. The week of proper meals and rest at the Buchanan Ranch had brought color to her cheeks and a softness to her features that made his heart catch. "Josie," he began, then stopped, uncertain how to express the thoughts that had been consuming him. She waited, patient yet expectant. "When this is over," he finally continued, "when Thornton is brought to justice, what will you do?" She considered the question carefully. "I've never allowed myself to think that far ahead. The homestead needs work, the roof leaks in 3 places, the corral is falling down." She glanced at him. "But it's good land. Could be something more, with the right investment, the right partner." The implication wasn't lost on Ross. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Miss O'Malley?" he asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm suggesting possibilities, Mr. Lawson," she returned, a matching smile lighting her eyes. "For a man who might be tired of drifting." Ross stepped closer, drawn by something he could no longer deny. "And if that man wanted more than a business partnership," Josephine's breath caught as the space between them narrowed, "then he should say so plainly." "I'm not good with words," Ross admitted, his voice low. "Better with action." His hand came up to cup her cheek, rough fingers gentle against her skin. Josephine leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly before meeting his again with unmistakable invitation. The first brush of his lips against hers was tentative, questioning. Her response pressing closer, her hand coming to rest against his chest, provided the answer he sought. The kiss deepened, becoming an exploration, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ross rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't come here looking for this," he whispered. "Nor I," she admitted. "But perhaps it found us anyway." The sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. They sprang apart, instantly alert, scanning the darkening landscape. "There!" Ross pointed to movement among the trees below. "At least 3 riders. Thornton's men?" Josephine was already moving back toward the cabin, her practical nature reasserting itself. "Can't be sure, but we can't take chances." Ross followed, his hand moving to his holster. "Get inside. I'll cover the approach." "I'm not hiding while you face them alone," she objected, reaching for her father's shotgun just inside the door. Their eyes met in a brief, intense exchange, his concern evident, her determination unwavering. Finally, Ross nodded. "Take the left window. I'll take the right. If it's trouble, we make every shot count." They positioned themselves at opposite windows, weapons ready. The riders emerged from the trees, 3 men moving cautiously up the trail. In the fading light, it was impossible to identify them with certainty. "Hold it right there," Ross called when they were within earshot. "State your business." The lead rider reined in, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "We're looking for Ross Lawson," he called back. "Bill Buchanan sent us." Suspicion kept Ross's finger near the trigger. "Prove it." "He said to tell you the hawk flies at midnight. Said you'd know what it means." Ross exhaled slowly. It was the signal they'd arranged with Bill if he needed to send men. They'd use that phrase. "They're friendly," he told Josephine, though he didn't lower his weapon immediately. "Still, stay alert." The men approached cautiously, dismounting at Ross's direction and leaving their rifles in their saddle scabbards. Only when they stood in the lamplight did Ross recognize one of them, a ranch hand from the Triple B he'd seen but not spoken with. "What's happened?" Ross demanded, finally lowering his weapon. "Thornton's men raided the ranch last night," the man reported grimly. "Looking for you 2. They roughed up the boss pretty bad before they believed you weren't there." Josephine gasped. "Are Bill and Margaret all right?" "Mrs. Buchanan's fine. The boss has a broken arm and some bruises, but he'll heal." The ranch hand looked uncomfortable. "That's not the worst of it, though. They're saying you murdered a man back in Laramie County, Lawson. There's a wanted poster with your name on it." Ross's face hardened. "Thornton's work. He's trying to discredit me before I can testify. Bill figured as much. That's why we're here. The marshal's due back in Cheyenne tomorrow. Bill says you need to get there right away, before Thornton can spread his lies any further." "We'll leave at first light," Ross decided. "Will you ride with us?" The men exchanged glances. "That's the plan. Boss says we're to get you there alive, whatever it takes." That night, with the ranch hands camped outside to keep watch, Ross and Josephine found themselves again alone in the cabin, the urgency of their situation adding weight to every word, every look. "This changes things," Ross said as they prepared for what might be their last night of safety. "The journey to Cheyenne will be dangerous. If Thornton has put out wanted posters, we'll have every opportunist and lawman between here and there looking for me." "For us," Josephine corrected. "I'm in this with you now, remember?" Ross moved to her, taking her hands in his. "That's what worries me. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." "Nothing will happen," she assured him, though they both knew it was a promise neither could keep. "And if it does?" She hesitated, then continued with quiet conviction. "If it does, I'd rather face it having known you, having helped bring Julia's killer to justice, than spend the rest of my life alone and wondering, what if?" Ross's hands tightened on hers. "Josie," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "If we make it through this," she stopped him with a finger to his lips. "When," she corrected. "When we make it through this." He smiled despite the gravity of their situation, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "When we make it through this," he amended, "I want to build something with you. A life. A future." The simple declaration from a man who had spent years driven solely by vengeance brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "I want that too," she whispered. This time when they came together, their kiss held both the urgency of uncertain tomorrows and the promise of hopes just beginning to take shape. As they settled into the small bed that night, the carefully maintained distance between them vanished. Ross drew Josephine into his arms, her head coming to rest on his shoulder, their bodies fitting together as if designed for this very purpose. "I never expected to find you," he murmured against her hair. "Nor I you," she replied, her hand resting over his heart. "But here we are." Morning came all too soon. They packed quickly, checking and rechecking weapons, going over the route one final time. The plan was straightforward: ride hard for Cheyenne, avoiding towns and settlements, staying off the main trails where possible. If they pushed, they could reach the city by nightfall the next day. As they prepared to depart, Ross pulled Josephine aside for one private moment. "Whatever happens," he said intently, "know that meeting you has changed everything for me, given me something to fight for beyond revenge." She reached up to touch his face, memorizing its contours. "Then let's win this fight, together." The journey began under clearing skies, the small party making good time across the rugged terrain. They rode in formation, one ranch hand leading, Ross and Josephine in the middle, the other two men bringing up the rear. Every rise was approached with caution, every stretch of open ground crossed at speed. By midday, they had descended from the foothills into rolling prairie, where the lack of cover made them all uneasy. They paused briefly to rest the horses in a small copse of trees near a stream, everyone remaining vigilant. "So far, so good," the lead ranch hand, Tom, observed cautiously. "No sign of pursuit." "That worries me more than if we'd seen them," Ross admitted. "Thornton's not one to give up easily." As if his words had summoned trouble, the distant sound of multiple horses reached them. Tom climbed a tree for better visibility, returning quickly with grim news. "6 riders coming fast from the north." "Could be coincidence, but we can't take that chance," Ross decided. "We'll split up. Josie and I will head east, toward the river crossing. The rest of you continue south as planned. Make it look like we're still with you." "Boss said to stay with you," Tom objected. "And I'm saying this gives us all a better chance." Ross's tone brooked no argument. "Lead them away if you can. If not, don't take unnecessary risks. Your families need you back." Reluctantly, the ranch hands agreed to the plan. As they prepared to separate, Tom handed Ross a folded paper. "The map to the river crossing? There's a ferryman there who owes Bill a favor. He'll get you across without questions." Minutes later, Ross and Josephine were galloping eastward, keeping to low ground where possible. Behind them, they heard distant shouts as their pursuers spotted the larger group and gave chase. "Do you think they'll be all right?" Josephine asked as they pushed their horses to a sustainable pace. "Tom's smart. He'll lead them on a chase, then lose them in the broken country to the south." Ross hoped his confidence wasn't misplaced. "We need to make the river by nightfall. Once across, we'll be in better position to reach Cheyenne without being spotted." They rode hard through the afternoon, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. As the sun began its descent, they found themselves in increasingly rough country, deep ravines and gullies carved by seasonal floods, patches of dense brush that slowed their progress. The sound came without warning, a rifle shot that sent dirt spraying just ahead of them. Ross reacted instantly, pulling his horse sharply left while reaching for Josephine's reins to guide her mount into the shelter of a nearby gully. "2 riders on the ridge," he said tersely, dismounting and drawing his Colt. They must have split from the main group. "How did they find us?" Josephine slid from her saddle, moving to secure the nervous horses. "Doesn't matter now." Ross peered carefully over the edge of the gully, assessing their situation. The riders were moving cautiously down from the ridge, using the terrain for cover. "We need to move. This position's too exposed." They led the horses deeper into the maze of gullies, seeking better ground to make a stand if necessary. The sound of pursuit grew closer. Their hunters knew these badlands better than they did. "There," Josephine pointed to a narrow side ravine. "It looks like it opens up ahead." The ravine did indeed widen, but not into the escape route they had hoped for. Instead, they found themselves in a small box canyon, its steep walls impossible to climb on horseback. "We'll have to go back," Ross began, but the sound of approaching riders made it clear that option was already closed. "Over here." Josephine led the way to a jumble of boulders at the canyon's edge, offering some defensive position. "We can hold them off from here." They secured the horses behind the largest boulder and took positions, Ross with his Colt, Josephine with the shotgun. "Remember," he told her quietly, "aim carefully, make every shot count." They didn't have to wait long. 2 men appeared at the ravine entrance, rifles ready. They paused, scanning the canyon, clearly aware their quarry was trapped. "Lawson," one called, "we know you're in there. Make it easy on yourself and the woman." Ross remained silent, his finger steady on the trigger. Beside him, Josephine's breathing was calm, controlled. The men advanced cautiously, separating to make themselves harder targets. When they were 30 yards out, one raised his rifle toward the boulders. Ross fired first, his shot catching the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second hunter dove for cover as Josephine's shotgun roared, the blast striking rock near his position. "You're outmatched, Lawson," the wounded man called, his voice strained with pain. "More men are coming. You've got nowhere to go." "Then we've got nothing to lose," Ross called back. "How much is Thornton paying you to die out here?" A tense standoff ensued, neither side willing to expose themselves. As the light began to fade, Ross grew increasingly concerned. If reinforcements arrived, their position would become untenable. "We need to create a diversion," he whispered to Josephine. "Get to the horses and be ready to ride when I give the signal." "What are you planning?" Suspicion narrowed her eyes. "Nothing foolish," he assured her, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Just going to give them something else to think about." Before she could object, Ross had gathered dry brush and struck a match. The tinder caught quickly, and he tossed it toward the canyon's edge, where summer-dried grass provided ready fuel. Fanned by the evening breeze, flames spread rapidly along the perimeter. "Now!" Ross urged, firing several shots toward their pursuers' position to keep them pinned down as Josephine ran for the horses. The diversion worked better than expected. Smoke billowed across the canyon floor, obscuring visibility. Ross made his way to where Josephine waited with the horses, mounting quickly despite the pain in his leg. "Stay close," he instructed as they urged their mounts forward, using the smoke for cover. They burst from the ravine entrance at a gallop, surprising the hunters who scrambled for their own horses. Shots followed them, but distance and poor light made accuracy impossible. They rode hard into the gathering darkness, putting as much ground between themselves and their pursuers as possible. Night had fully fallen when they finally slowed, the horses blowing hard from the extended run. Stars glittered overhead, providing just enough light to make out the terrain. "We've lost them for now," Ross said, listening intently to the night sounds. "But we need to keep moving. The river can't be far." Despite exhaustion and the constant threat of pursuit, Josephine felt a strange exhilaration. "We make a good team," she observed, her voice warm in the darkness. Ross reached across the space between their horses, finding her hand. "The best." They rode through the night, navigating by stars and the occasional landmarks indicated on Tom's map. Near dawn, they heard the rushing sound of the river, swollen with spring runoff from the distant mountains. The ferry crossing consisted of a crude dock and a cable-guided raft large enough for several horses. As promised, the ferryman asked no questions when they mentioned Bill Buchanan's name, though his eyes lingered curiously on their dusty, trail-worn appearance. "Crossing's tricky this time of year," he warned as he prepared the raft. "Water's running high and fast. Hang on to your horses." The crossing proved as difficult as promised, the current tugging strongly at the raft as the ferryman worked the cable mechanism. Midway across, Josephine's horse spooked, nearly pulling free before Ross caught its reins. "Easy," he soothed, as much to Josephine as to the nervous animal. "Almost there." When they finally reached the far bank, Ross paid the ferryman extra to delay any other crossings for a few hours. "If anyone asks, you haven't seen us," he instructed, pressing gold coins into the man's weathered hand. "Ain't seen nobody," the ferryman agreed, pocketing the money. "Though, if you're heading to Cheyenne, there's a line shack about 5 miles east. Good place to rest before the final push." The suggested shelter proved to be a simple one-room structure used by cowboys during seasonal cattle drives. It offered little comfort beyond four walls and a roof, but after their night of hard riding, it seemed a luxury. We should rest a few hours, Ross decided as they unsaddled the horses. Hit Cheyenne by late afternoon. The marshals should be back by then. Inside, they shared the last of their provisions, jerky and hardtack washed down with water from their canteens. The simple meal consumed, exhaustion hit them both. They spread their bedrolls side by side on the dirt floor. "One more day," Josephine murmured as they settled together, her head finding its now familiar place on his shoulder. "Tomorrow night, this could all be over." Ross tightened his arm around her. "And then, we begin." They slept deeply, secure in each other's presence and the knowledge that the river formed a significant barrier between them and pursuit. When they woke, the sun was already high, slanting through cracks in the shack's walls. "We've slept too long," Ross said, immediately alert. "We need to move." They prepared quickly, both feeling the pressure of time. The final leg to Cheyenne would take several hours, even pushing the horses. If they arrived after dark, the marshal's office might be closed, forcing them to find lodging and remain exposed until morning. The terrain east of the river was easier riding open plains with gentle rolls rather than the broken badlands they had traversed the previous day. They made good time, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By late afternoon, they crested a rise and saw it Cheyenne spread before them, its buildings catching the slanting sunlight. So close to their goal, both felt a surge of cautious optimism. "We'll approach from the north," Ross decided. Less traffic, fewer eyes, head straight for the marshal's office. The city's outskirts were quiet as they entered, most businesses already closed for the day. They kept to side streets, alert for any sign of Thornton's influence. The marshal's office stood on a corner near the town square, its windows still lit a good sign. "Wait here," Ross instructed as they dismounted in an alley across from the building. "Let me make sure it's safe first." "We go together," Josephine countered firmly. "I didn't come this far to wait in an alley." Their eyes met in a brief contest of wills that ended with Ross's reluctant nod. "Stay close. At the first sign of trouble." "I know what to do," she assured him. They crossed the street quickly, Ross's hand near his holster, Josephine scanning the surroundings with watchful eyes. The office door stood partially open, lamplight spilling onto the boardwalk. Ross pushed it wider, stepping inside with Josephine close behind. A man looked up from a desk cluttered with papers, middle-aged, with a weathered face and alert eyes beneath silver-streaked hair. The badge on his chest identified him as Federal Marshal Jenkins. "Can I help you?" he asked, his hand casually moving toward the drawer where a lawman might keep a weapon. "Marshal Jenkins," Ross began, keeping his hands visible. "My name is Ross Lawson. I've come about Edward Thornton." Recognition flashed in the marshal's eyes. "Lawson. There's a poster with your name on it. Murder charge out of Laramie County." "A false charge," Ross said steadily. "Part of Thornton's attempt to discredit me before I could bring evidence against him." Jenkins studied him carefully, his hand still near the drawer. "What kind of evidence?" "Documents proving bribery of officials. Witness statements connecting him to at least 3 murders, including my brother's." Ross met the lawman's gaze directly. "And testimony from Miss Josephine O'Malley regarding her sister's death at Thornton's ranch." The marshal's eyes shifted to Josephine, assessing. "That's quite a list of accusations against a powerful man." "Every word true," she confirmed. "We've risked our lives to bring this information to you, Marshal. Thornton's men have been hunting us for days." Jenkins was silent for a long moment, weighing their words. Then, deliberately, he moved his hand away from the drawer. "I've had my suspicions about Thornton for years. Never had enough to move on." His expression hardened. "Let's see what you've brought me." For the next hour, they laid out the evidence Ross had gathered over 2 years' financial records, showing payments to local officials, sworn statements from witnesses to Thornton's intimidation tactics, documentation of land transfers that occurred under suspicious circumstances. Josephine added her account of Julia's employment at the Thornton Ranch and the inconsistencies surrounding her death. "This is compelling," Jenkins acknowledged when they finished, "enough to justify a federal investigation, at minimum." He looked up from the papers spread across his desk. "But Thornton won't go down without a fight, and he has friends in high places." "We understand the risks," Ross said. "We've lived with them long enough." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. You'll need protection while I get this process started. I can arrange for you to stay at the hotel under guard. Relief washed over both of them after days of danger and uncertainty. They had reached their goal. The evidence was in proper hands, the wheels of justice beginning to turn. There's one more thing, Ross said as they prepared to leave for the hotel. The men with Thornton during the raid that killed my brother. 2 of them were never identified. Jenkins frowned. You have names now? Better than that. Ross withdrew a folded paper from his inside pocket, a bank draft with 2 signatures. This was in the documents I took from Thornton's office. It authorizes payment to eliminate the Lawson problem, signed by Thornton and his foreman, Harker. The marshal examined the document, his expression grim. This is the final piece. With this, we can connect Thornton directly to your brother's murder. He looked up at them, respect evident in his gaze. You've done good work, both of you. Dangerous, but good. At the hotel, Jenkins arranged for adjoining rooms with a deputy posted in the hallway. Stay put until I come for you, he instructed. We'll move on Thornton at dawn. Alone at last, with safety provisionally assured, Ross and Josephine found themselves in the strange quiet of aftermath. The hotel room seemed impossibly luxurious after days of rough travel. Clean sheets, soft pillows, a porcelain basin of fresh water. It hardly seems real, Josephine said, as she washed trail dust from her face. That we made it, that it's almost over. Ross moved behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. Not over, he corrected softly. Just beginning. She turned to face him, their proximity intimate in the lamplight. You said once that you'd spent years not allowing yourself to think beyond bringing Thornton to justice. Her eyes searched his. Have you thought about it now? What comes after? Ross's hands framed her face, his touch reverent. I have. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his features. I see a homestead with a new roof, a rebuilt corral. Perhaps some cattle of our own. His voice softened. Children someday, running across land that's truly free from Thornton's shadow. You've given this some thought, she observed, her heart quickening at the future he described. I've had little else to think about these past days, riding beside you. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. Watching you face danger without flinching, realizing that what began as gratitude for saving my life had become something far deeper. And what is that something? She asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. Love, he said simply. A word I didn't think I'd ever use again after losing my family. But there it is. His eyes held hers steadily. I love you, Josephine O'Malley, and if you'll have me, I want to build that future with you. Tears welled in Josephine's eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so unexpected it almost hurt. I never thought I'd find this, she whispered. After Julia died, after Father followed, I was so alone, so focused on survival. She raised her hands to cover his, until a wounded cowboy collapsed at my feet and changed everything. Ross smiled at the memory. I told you I couldn't stand. And I told you I'd sit with you, she finished. But I've done far more than sit, haven't I? I've ridden beside you, fought beside you. Fallen in love beside me? He asked, hope evident in his voice. Yes, she answered simply. I love you, Ross Lawson. Their kiss sealed the declaration tender at first, then deepening with the release of days of tension and years of loneliness. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Marry me, Ross said, the words somewhere between question and statement. As soon as this business with Thornton is finished, start our life together without delay. Josephine's answer was another kiss, this one leaving no doubt about her response. Dawn brought Marshal Jenkins to their door, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Thornton's been arrested, he reported, along with Harker and 2 others. They're being transported to the federal courthouse in Denver for arraignment. Relief washed over both of them. Then it's over? Josephine asked. The immediate danger, yes, Jenkins confirmed. But the legal process will take time. You'll both need to testify at the trial. We'll be there, Ross assured him, whatever it takes to see justice done. In the meantime, the marshal continued, I've sent word to Bill Buchanan that you're safe. His men returned to the ranch as well, though one took a bullet during their diversion. Seeing their concern, he added quickly, "Nothing life-threatening. They did their job well, led Thornton's main force on a wild chase while you made it to the river. We owe them a debt we can't repay," Ross said soberly. Jenkins nodded in agreement. "You're free to go about your business now, though I'd advise staying in Cheyenne a few more days until we're certain all of Thornton's men have been rounded up." He hesitated, then added, "And congratulations are in order, I hear. The hotel clerk mentioned you inquired about the local minister." Josephine blushed slightly as Ross took her hand. "News travels fast," she observed. "Small towns," Jenkins said with a knowing smile. "Nothing stays secret for long." 3 days later, in the small church near Cheyenne's town square, Ross Lawson and Josephine O'Malley were married in a simple ceremony attended by Marshal Jenkins, the Buchanans, Bill's arm in a sling but his spirit undimmed, and several ranch hands who had risked their lives to help bring Thornton to justice. Margaret Buchanan had insisted on proper attire, whisking Josephine away for fittings at the town's dressmaker, while Bill saw to it that Ross had a suitable suit. "Can't have you getting married looking like you just rode in off the range," the older rancher had declared. As they exchanged vows, Ross found himself marveling at the journey that had brought them here from a chance encounter on a dusty plain to this moment of commitment before witnesses. Josephine's hand was steady in his as they promised their futures to each other, her eyes clear and certain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but heartfelt, their audience's applause a cheerful benediction on their union. The celebration afterward at the town's best restaurant was equally simple but joyous. Bill Buchanan raised his glass in a toast. "To justice served and love found, may your future be as bright as your courage deserves." As the evening drew to a close, Ross found himself on the restaurant's small balcony, gazing at stars that seemed somehow brighter than before. Josephine joined him, slipping her arm through his. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Though I still can't believe how it all began with a wounded cowboy who couldn't stand." Ross chuckled, turning to draw her into his arms. "Best thing that ever happened to me, taking that bullet." His expression grew more serious. "It brought me to you." "And I sat with you," she reminded him, smiling at the memory. "And now we'll stand together," he promised, "for all the days to come." 1 year later, the O'Malley homestead, now the Lawson Ranch, had undergone a transformation. The leaky roof was sound, the corral rebuilt and expanded to hold the small herd of cattle they'd begun to raise. The cabin itself had grown by 2 rooms, with plans for more as their family expanded. Edward Thornton had been convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy, bribery, and murder. His sentence, 20 years in federal prison, had brought a measure of peace to those he had wronged, including Ross and Josephine. On a warm summer evening, they sat together on the porch Ross had built their first month as a married couple. Josephine's hand rested protectively over her rounded belly, their first child due before winter's arrival. "Any regrets?" Ross asked, watching her profile in the golden light of sunset. "Not one," she answered without hesitation. "Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't been shot that day. If you'd ridden past my cabin instead of collapsing at my door." Ross took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway. Some things are meant to be. Like a wounded cowboy and a lonely doctor's daughter," she teased gently. "Exactly like that." His free hand moved to cover hers on her belly, feeling the flutter of new life beneath. "I never believed in fate until I met you. Now, I can't imagine any other path." As night fell across the Wyoming plains, they remained on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast sky above their home. The journey that had begun with danger and uncertainty had led them here to safety, to justice, to love. "I'm glad you couldn't stand that day," Josephine said softly, nestling against his shoulder. Ross smiled, drawing her closer. "And I'm glad you sat with me," he replied. "Because standing or sitting, walking or riding, as long as we're together, we're exactly where we're meant to be.